Chapter 7. Parliament, its sovereignty. Sovereignty, or the supreme legislative authority in Britain, lies with Parliament, or to be more accurate, with the Queen in Parliament, that is, with the Queen and the two houses of Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. It means that the Queen in Parliament recognizes no other domestic authority in the country superior to itself. Although the three parts of this sovereign body play different roles in the Constitution, but for the legislative purposes they act as a single corporate body, so that no one part can legislate without the concurrence of the other two, except to the extent as the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949 have restricted the powers of the House of Lords. The sovereignty of Parliament is regarded as the fundamental principle of the British Constitution. Parliament is sovereign, because there is no law it cannot make, whether it is a law to amend the Constitution itself, or it is an ordinary law, as for example, to establish a university or to regulate traffic on the roads, and there is no law it cannot repeal or modify, whether it was made by itself, or by a previous parliament. Parliament can legalize what was illegal before, and thus free a person from the punishment inflicted by a court under the law, as it did by passing the Indemnity Acts in the last century, to exempt the dissenters from the penalty to be inflicted under the Test Act, passed by a previous parliament. It can prolong its own life indefinitely, and it can make criticism of the government a punishable offense. But the only thing it cannot do is to bind the succeeding parliaments not to do what they would like to do. Legally, the sovereignty of Parliament means that no court in Britain can declare any law or act of Parliament invalid and unconstitutional, as the American Supreme Court can. Moreover, no distinction is made in the British Constitution between ordinary law and constitutional law, as in the American Constitution. Politically, it means that the power and jurisdiction of the Parliament for making laws is so transcendent and absolute, as Sir Edward Coke said, that it cannot be confined either for persons or causes within any bounds. It extends to all persons, to all places, and to all events within the boundaries of the United Kingdom and its dependencies, if any. It means that the government, the executive part, can acquire all the legal powers necessary to carry through its programs and policies. In other words, Parliament, or the House of Commons, is really a political arena, where the highest and final decisions are taken in law and policy by the government in active confrontation and criticism by the opposition parties on the floor of the Houses of Parliament, a confrontation which is really a continuation of the conflict between them among the people outside before and after the elections. In Parliament, these conflicts are carried out in a more purposeful and responsible manner so as to make laws and policies, for which the government party has received a mandate from the people, by winning a majority of seats in the House of Commons at the general elections. This is how the parliamentary democracy operates in England. Its political implications are obvious. Parliamentary sovereignty is really a constitutional or political device for a strong and effective government, a historical urge of the English people, if not of the other constituent nationalities of the United Kingdom, such as the Scots, Northern Irelanders or the Welsh. The people of England always favoured a strong parliamentary government empowered to make any law, or adopt any policy which would protect and develop their national interests and rights. Such a strong government means, firstly, a parliament on which no limits or restrictions or conditions of any kind can be imposed in its legislative functions. Secondly, an executive which would enforce the laws and implement the policies for which it would be directly responsible only to Parliament and to no other non-political body. Thirdly, it means that there is no written constitution which would restrict or limit the legislative supremacy of Parliament by setting up a court of law, as in the American Constitution, with power to review and void. Hence there is no constitutional guarantee of fundamental rights in Britain. protecting the liberty and rights of the citizens from the legislative powers of Parliament. That is why there are laws made by Parliament which have denied certain rights to a class of citizens in that country, which are available to other classes. For instance, the Commonwealth Immigration Act of 1969, the Kenyan Nations Act, has discriminated against the colored immigrants with British passports, while no such restriction was imposed on the white passport holders from Kenya. Had there been judicial review of parliamentary legislation, the courts would have declared such discriminatory laws unconstitutional and null and void. Such are the implications of parliamentary democracy. Limitation on parliamentary sovereignty. There are, however, limitations on parliamentary sovereignty. Moral or internal limitations. Parliaments consist of members who have reasonable understanding and knowledge of the moral, social and political limitations of their power. They do not, normally, make laws which incite popular resistance. According to Leslie Stephen, the power of legislature is, of course, strictly limited. It is limited, so to speak, both from within and from without. From within, because the legislature is the product of a certain social condition, and determined by whatever determines the society, and from without, because the power of imposing laws is dependent upon the instinct of subordination which is itself limited. If the legislature decided that all blue-eyed babies should be murdered, the preservation of blue-eyed babies would be illegal, but legislatures must go mad before they could pass such a law, and subjects be idiotic before they could submit to it. According to Professor Lasky, no parliament would dare to disenfranchise the Roman Catholics or to prohibit the existence of trade unions. In other words, the system of party government in Britain ensures that Parliament legislates with its responsibility to the electorate in mind. The fact that no government could secure powers to kill all blue-eyed babies is not due to any legal limitations in the power of Parliament, but to the fact that both the government and the House of Commons derive their authority from the people. Limitations of international law. Furthermore, ordinarily Parliament will not make a law which contravenes the principles of international law. For instance, the case West Rand Gold Mining Company v. the King has laid down, whatever has received the common consent of civilized nations, must have received the assent of our country. The press and public opinion are also important on the sovereignty of Parliament. Moreover, the parliamentary sovereignty is also limited by the Statute of Westminster of 1931, according to which no law of Parliament will extend to a dominion, unless it is expressly requested and consented to by the latter. Every dominion has sovereign power to make law against any act of the British Parliament. Limitations arising from the EEC membership. In January 1973, Britain became a member of EEC, the European Economic Community, commonly known as the Common Market, and accepted obligations to make operative the provisions of European Communities Act within her territories. They provide for various types of community legislation, including regulations, to take direct effect in the member countries of the community. But they leave it to the British Parliament, as also to the national legislatures of other member states, to choose the form and method of implementing these provisions. In other words, the final decision to implement these provisions is still left with the British Parliament. In course of time, however, the membership of the European Community would materially restrict the sovereignty of the British Parliament, as also that of the national legislatures of the other member states. The reason is that, only by limiting the national sovereignty of the member states, that the European Community can achieve ultimate goal of European integration and unity.